I'm Gerald Holton, and I'm here in the physics department, have been here for some time as a professor. And I'm also interested in the history of science, and I'm a member of that department for many years. And today I'm very happy to be helpful in a new experiment right before you, namely a fine course.
You're also my teacher, and I owe a huge debt to you for guiding me into the field of history of science.
Yes, I remember my best students, and I'm going to embarrass you by saying I remember you very well.
I thought maybe we'd start by talking a little bit about something you've thought a great deal about, and that is about Einstein's style. Now, people might think that style is something that pertains to art and architecture or to poetry, but in what sense can there be a scientific style?
Well, I think that's a very fine question, because Einstein is infinite, like Mozart and Michelangelo, and therefore one tries to find a way to understand him. And I think a very good way is to think, what is peculiar about Einstein, which also led him to his particular way of doing science? One must think of Einstein in a way which is rare for most people, namely, he looks to us as if we were really two different people. One of them is a classicist, a nature philosopher, one to whom the ideas of the philosophers like Mach and Hume, whom he cites, are as important as Kepler and Newton and Maxwell. And so in one way, he really is a classicist. He loves the ideas of science as part of a unity. On the other hand, he is also a rebel. He calls himself gypsy throughout. He is a bohemian with his early way of living and even toward the end. And he does not want to be a revolutionary. He is against that. But he does not like authority for its own sake. In general, he will say, no, you don't have any standing here. Let me think this through myself.
The style also extends deep into the writing itself, so that in a way, there's a way of thinking of these papers of Einstein, not just the 4 papers that mark his work in 1905, but on into general relativity and beyond, where he's really concerned with an asymmetry. Symmetry is such a part of the way we see physics today that can you say something about how unusual it seemed at the time? What was out of the ordinary about beginning that way?
Well, it was so striking that to this day one wonders how his early papers even were publishable, because he seems to be worrying about something nobody else was worrying about, namely, as he said in his 1905 relativity paper, he says, the fact that you have to have 2 different equations depending on whether the magnet is moving to the coil or the coil to the magnet, that is unbearable, unerträglich. To me, this is an aesthetic problem which I cannot live with. There must be a way to simplify matters, to unify nature. He learned some of that idea from Mach, whom he respected very early for part of it. Namely, Mach thought of the Einheitswissenschaft, the unified science, which means, by the way, Wissenschaft means more than science. It means all of knowledge. Now, this style is so different. To him, it is almost an aesthetic experience to unify things. As he said to one of his fellows, Grossman, very early, it's a wonderful feeling to discover unity in 2 things which seem different from each other. But throughout his work, it is, for example, in special relativity, bring together the ideas of energy and mass, bring together space and time, bring together what seem to other people eternally different. And to him, these are unerträglich. You can't bear that difference.
So Einstein didn't like this idea of there being 2 explanations for what he saw as the same phenomenon, namely a magnet and a coil approaching. He didn't like it that if you took one perspective, you had one explanation, and took the perspective of the coil, you had another. Where did he end up? What was the goal of the paper then?
I think the goal of this paper, as it was with other papers of that time, was, as he said, not to make any revolutionary changes. He specifically avoided that, but rather, as he wrote to one of his friends, I'm just trying to improve the notions of space and time. To him, it was a matter of healing something that's wrong with physics at the time. It was not trying to be a great genius and dazzle people at all. In his first paper, for example, he does not what a new scientist who needs a job badly does, namely, he doesn't cite any of the people that he ought to honor in his papers, the way Niels Bohr does in his first papers. He knows very well that his career depends on other people. Not so Einstein. He's going to go on his own way. He just simply says, Galileo has done relativity for everything in mechanics, and there are these other people fighting whether electricity and magnetism is the answer, or energy is the answer. Why not just put them all together? Not a different way of thinking about in each of these little cubicles, but one general way. Now, this is very typical. He really, in a way, dedicated himself to one style of theory making. And for the time being, he's very happy with that paper, except for one thing. Of course, he's always curious. He says, this all just works for inertial systems. There is something missing here, the accelerated systems. I have to go and generalize. That the word generalized theory of relativity was in his writing long before it is general theory. He is a generalizer. And that, of course, comes some years later.